Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are the top of page 1295. Aleph Reish Tzadik Hey. The two aliyahs that are indicated in the Gershayim. The Gershayim, the tam above the word Havaya in the verse Havaya Yechata Meriva. Two aliyahs, one higher than the next, from Zah or Havaya de Latata to Havaya de Le'ela Keser. That's the first elevation. The second one is from Keser to the Atzmus Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, as well as two Yeridas from the Atzmus Ein Sof into Keser and from Keser into Zah. And the same, even on the higher level, before the Tzimtzum itself, we learned in this long parentheses, also two levels. There's the Yudke Vavke, the Shmoi, the Aliyah, the elevation from Vavke to Yudke, the Elikus, as is associating before the Tzimtzum, envisioning, allocating the resources before the Tzimtzum of relating to existence. That elevates to the Yudke, which is the primary place of the mitzvahs. The Ratzon Atzmi, or Koydem Aleisa Ratzon, that precedes the Ratzon for the worlds. So it's a Gili La'atzmi, but it's still a Gili. It's called Etzem Ha'er, but of Shmoi. And then there's who? The Helam, that completely has no relationship with existence altogether. That's the second elevation. And there too, there's the two Hamshachas as well, from the Helam into the Yudke, into the Etzem Ha'er, and from the Yudke, the Pnimius, into the Chitzenius, as we learned on top of page 1295, that the Yichud Pnimi is the Neshama for the Yichud Chitzeni, and that brings it all down, that even in the Ratzon, the Aliyas Ratzon, which is measured according to the hierarchy and structure of existence, there too should also radiate the Pnimius that's higher than existence. And that's V'neira, what you say, Shemecha, that not just the name is also awesome. You're bringing down the Hefeya Bahadar Goen Oischal Kol Yesh V'Seva. That we're bringing down the highest levels of the divine, not just transcendence, which is Sovev Kallah, the root of Sovev Kallah into Memaleh Kallah, but even the highest levels all the way down below. That sums up the end of the paragraph, page 1295. And with that, let's continue. The new paragraph, and the text can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow along. So now he's going to explain these two aliyahs in Avodah. And now, Beis aliyahs hanal, these two elevations, these two upright apostrophes of Gershayim, and even in the tone, the sound, a sound that goes up one tone to a higher tone. What is it? Ba'aveda yesh leimer. You can say Ayin Beis b'chinas Kallah. They're the two levels of Kallah. Hanemar v'shir hashirim. So in Shir hashirim, it talks about, of course, Basiligani achesi Kallah, but the word Kallah, the bride, is referred to in the two levels of a bride. What's called b'chinas Kallah Elah, v'Kallah Tata. The higher Kallah, the higher bride, and the lower bride. Now, what does that mean? So he says, the Lefi HaMuvan b'Torah Eir, according to what is understood in Torah Eir of the Alter Rebbe, in the Maimer called B'Dibra Maschil, the Maimer that begins, B'Chofei B'Kislev, so it's a Chanukah Maimer, Chofei B'Kislev, and another Maimer from the Alter Rebbe, U'B'Lekutei Torah, Dibra Maschil Tse'ena U'Re'ena, that's in Shir HaShirim. Tse'ena U'Re'ena is another Maimer, Lekutei Torah, so Torah and Lekutei Torah, the two twin books of the Alter Rebbe. What does he discuss? He discusses Be'inyan Su Yedechem Kodesh. He's talking about lifting up the arms as the Kohanim bless Su Yedechem Kodesh. So he says that these two levels of Kallah, Ayin Beis HaMadreges, the Memaleh Kallah, the Sovev Kallah. These are the two levels of Memaleh Kallah, which is the immanent energy of the divine that relates to existence. The Sovev Kallah, the transcendent energy that's beyond existence, but not completely beyond. The Hine, because now, Memaleh Kallah, the Sovev Kallah, and Shnei Neheim B'chinas Shmai Bilvad. Both of them are the level of only Shmai. Now, does he mean Bilvad only Shmai, or does he mean Hayahu Shmai Bilvad? Could be he's referring to the expression Shmai Bilvad like that. But regardless, it's the level of Shmai, not the level of Hu. As we learned before, it's two levels in Ur. Yud Kei Vav Kei. Either the Ur that relates to existence, which is the Ur that you're already so-called relating within the teacher, is relating to the student, or the Ur as he shines to himself, but it's still the Geder Gili. It's still in the world of Geder Gili. You can call it a mocker. It's called a mocker, some relationship. So both are the level of Shmai. That God's great name is Meshubach, is praised, is precious, umafur, and glorified. Adeyat, forever and ever. So the Shmei HaGadol is Meshubach umafur adeyat, your great name. What is the great name? Of course, we're talking about Shmei. So he says, the Gam B'chinas Adeyad, Sheb B'chinas Bli Gvul. Adeyad is a level of Bli Gvul. Adeyad means forever and ever. It's eternity. So that's a level of Bli Gvul. It's not limited, forever, eternity. So even that level, which is B'chinas Bli Gvul, B'chinas Shmei HaGadol B'lvad. So clearly, B'lvad he means here, not Shmei B'lvad. He means it's still only the name, his great name. Now, B'lvad should not be misunderstood as being minimal only. He means only relative to who, to God himself. His name is considered B'lvad. The point being is that even though it's Adeyad, it's eternal, Bli Gvul, it's still called Shmei HaGadol, his great name. The Gam B'Sharshan B'Erein Sof Shalifnei HaTzimtzum, because also in their root, remember we've been learning everything both after the Tzimtzum, more in microcosm, and before the Tzimtzum in macrocosm. So he said also in their root, in Erein Sof, in the infinite divine light, pre-Tzimtzum, Ze'orak B'chinas Hagili de Erein Sof, Commission is Bar Le'il. Both these levels, the root of Memaleh Kallah and Sovev Kallah, are both only the level of Gili of Erein Sof. It doesn't deal with the concealed and hidden dimensions that God did not reveal in any form of expression. Both levels. And now a second parenthesis after the first parenthesis, Ubechlolis, and in general, these two levels, Hein Bechinas Ha'ara, a reflection, V'Ha'ara de Ha'ara, and a reflection of a reflection. He's adding now another element to understanding these two levels. A reflection of the source. Remember, a reflection already is not the etzem. It's a reflection of the etzem. But then there could be a reflection of a reflection. You could have a mirror image, but you could have a mirror of the mirror, a reflection of a reflection. So in Chassidus, these terms are used pretty often in understanding how the Ur transmigrates, so to speak, or evolves from level to level. So you have the etzem Ur, you have a reflection of the light, you have a reflection of the reflection, and many different expressions used in this context just to simply explain how the Ur gets diminished from level to level. But a reflection does not mean a helam. Reflection means it's an actual reflection. It's just not the etzem in itself. So it's a reflection of it. And then there could be a reflection of a reflection. Sometimes there's even an expression, ha'ara, de ha'ara, de ha'ara. In Ageres HaKedesh 20, he uses that expression. Other places, a reflection of a reflection of a reflection. Here, we're talking about two levels. One is a reflection, which would be the higher level, and then a reflection of a reflection. Like in the context of the artist, even the artist, as he is a general artist and he can create infinite types of art, it's still not who he is essentially. It's a reflection of who he is. And then the art that he chooses, one piece of art, 10 spheres, is like a reflection of all his artistry. Just to use that as an example to explain Commotion is barely ill, as was explained earlier. Okay, so it's just another addition in the parentheses to help understand these two levels. But he hasn't yet explained what this is in Avodah. He's just laying the ground now, explained that there's two levels of Kallah. These two levels of Kallah, according to the Torah, Likutei Torah, are related to Memaleh Kallah and Sovev Kallah, which is all Shmoy HaGadol, all Shmoy. Omnom, however, Hasagas and Neshama Melubeshes Beguf, the comprehension of a soul as it manifests in a body, meaning as the soul comes down below, not as it's above. Ubechlolis Neshama is the Biyah. So, and in general, the souls of Biyah, Abri Yitzira Asiya, Hanitfosim Begeshem, which Nitfosim means that they become connected with, and they're contained by, they are relating to Geshem. The Neshamas of higher than Biyah are not Nitfas Begeshem, they always retain a certain element of divine spirituality. But the Neshamas Biyah in general, Nitfosim Begeshem means that they relate to, they are, Nitfas means to be grasped by, it means that it's contained by, it associates with. Looking for the right word, maybe other words that can be better even. And the Avodah of these neshamas of Biyah is primarily of Evdei Hashem begufam. They serve God with their bodies. There's Evdei Hashem benishmasam. We learned this earlier a number of times. Those that serve God with their soul, their main focus is soul work. And then there's the working with the body, transforming the body, refining it, elevating it, and so on. So he says, so in general, so the understanding of a neshama in general as it manifests in a body, and more generally, neshamas of Biyah that relate to Geshem and they serve with the body. Hu b'bchinas Memaleh Kallah. What do we comprehend? Because we are manifest inside of a body, we are not able to relate to things that are outside of the corporeal and outside of the physical. Even when we understand godliness, it's godliness as it relates to our physical reality. That's Memaleh Kallah. And this, of course, comes down to the level that all human beings are on. Why is it that we understand and relate to that, our saga? We're not talking about amunah now, faith. We're talking about understanding in a way that we can relate to intangibly, is because since this is ha'ara lekis, it's a divine reflection, not the etzem, shaba b'bchinas simtsum, that comes in a diminished form or in a concealed form, u'bchinas islapshus be'elamis, and the way that it gets enclosed and manifest in the worlds. So we're talking about a divine energy that's commensurate and relates to us. So we're capable of having a comprehension of it, of the divine as it relates to existence. The gam haseichel hativi, and also natural mind, even the natural mind, which he means not necessarily the divine soul's mind, but even the natural mind. Seichel hativi, the seichel of a human being, a natural human being, biyacholti lahasik b'zeh, has the capacity to understand in this divine energy that relates to existence. So, for example, when you say that the world is made up of elements, and elements are comprised of molecules, which are in turn built from atoms and then subatomic particles, it's not difficult to explain to someone that within it all, there's also divine energy. Not on bread alone does man live, but on the spark or the expression of the divine within. So though it's true, it's more sublime than a physical entity, like a scientific empirical experience, but it's not something that the mind can't comprehend. We could understand a divine energy that relates to us, and we can acknowledge it, and we can thank it, and we can appreciate it. But then he continues, Ubezeh, And in this understanding of the divine within existence, in this itself, there are a number of many of levels, different levels. In what level of the divine is the comprehension? In other words, it's not just a stationary understanding. There are levels. What level of the divine? You could have a lower level, a higher level. And the contemplation that takes place in this matter, when a person contemplates on godliness, so contemplating, when we say, for example, raise your eyes to heaven and see who has created all of this. Or in the words of the Rambam, how does a person, or Kate said, how does a person come to avase v'yirase, to love and reverence of God, through mizbeinen li'izbeinen, to contemplate on the greatness of nature, on the celestial bodies, on their steadfastness, their consistency, and different things we learned that we contemplate on nature, that we can come to understand the divine force with, and nothing creates itself, and also the beautiful design and the different things that the world can teach us about God. That from my flesh I behold God. So he says, his bonus is the Vedas to know, and to understand, the divine reflection within existence. And also not just to understand the divine, that this divine is only a reflection, levad, only a reflection. So that's also part of the contemplation. Not just recognizing and appreciating the divine, but recognizing that it's only one piece of art from the artist's genius or the artist's talent. So it's only a reflection of him. There's a lot more. When you talk about it in comparison, it's infinitely distant compared to the atzmus of Ein Sof, the core of the divine energy. So this divine energy that goes into Yehi Rakia, Teitz Eretz Desha, everything we relate to in existence, number one, we can comprehend it to some extent. And secondly, we also comprehend how it's only a reflection compared to the source of where it all originates from. U'kamoshe Kosov, like it says, Kodesh, that God is removed, Kodesh, He's holy, is removed. Melei kol haaretz kvedei. Now, what does that mean? And the world is filled with His glory. So he says, the atzmos ein sof who Kodesh removed them. So you're saying it starts with Kodesh, that God is removed from Melei kol haaretz kvedei is Memaleh Kallah, that God fills Malay kol haaretz kvedei. He fills the world with His covet. And Kodesh means He's Kodesh Shemuvdal, He's holy and separate from it because He's above and beyond it. In other words, it's not pantheism that nature is God and God is nature. Nature is God, but God is not nature. God is a lot more than the sum of the total, some parts, more than the total of the sum of the sum parts. Sum total of the parts, I should say. Okay. Umashamole kol haaretz. And that which God fills, all of existence, all of the earth, all of the world, hurak kvedei bilvad. So in other words, I say, it's only His glory, His honor. Pchinaziv yikore. Only a reflection of His yekod, of his glory. So he's continuing now in the contemplation of an neshama beguf, how souls inside bodies understand, and in general, the souls of Biyah that relate to Gashmis. But he continues. Interesting.
You take any questions?
Not in the middle of the sentence. Let me finish a section.
Okay.
Va'arazu gufa, and this very reflection, kamoishi b'mkeirei, harihu b'b'chinas bitl b'tachlis. So yet another step in this contemplation. So far, two things. We understand and relate to the divine as it relates to us in existence. We understand it's only a reflection compared to the divine on its own, so to speak. And now he's saying that this reflection, the way it's in its source, it's b'chinas bitl b'tachlis, completely nullified. It's only power and energy and vitality is only when it's mislabish be'elims. In other words, if you think of the artist, the way he's investing in his paintbrush and he's painting an image, there, that energy has significance. But number one, as he said, we relate to it. Number two, that energy is infinitely distant from the energy as it is in the source of the artist. And when it's in the source, it doesn't have the significance it has when it's on a canvas. Because now it's in its source, so its only power is when it's mislabish, and then you see the Oir v'chayis and its power. But in its source, it's completely nullified. But the way it's in its source, there it has no significance. Like the light of the sun inside the sun. On earth or outside of the sun, sunlight is very powerful. It heats and warms and brings us light. But within the sun, what is the light's value? It's completely nullified within the very source. There you don't even call it in the name light or reflection at all, because it's in the source. It doesn't have any significance. And therefore, what is the Avodah from this now? He concludes, that's the word Kallah. The word Kallah comes from the word Kiloyim. And that's why the soul expires, is completely, gets dissolved. The tichse from the word chukah, from the word yearning. The soul, to be encompassed by atzmus ein sof, HaKadosh umuvdal ma'elims. So through this contemplation of the neshama and the body, of understanding God as the divine that relates to existence and how it's only a reflection, and that reflection in its source is completely so-called nullified, that tells you that's why the neshama, based on that contemplation, wants to completely be dissolved and absorbed in the source, which is removed from the world. So here I'll stop, even though we're still in the middle of the contemplation of Memaleh Kalalman. He's going to go to Sovev of Kallah in a few lines from now. He's going to explain more what this level of Kallah Tata is, the lower Kallah, which is this level of Memaleh Kalalman and our contemplation that ultimately causes us to want to be dissolved and absorbed in this level through this contemplation. But I will stop here if there's any questions, even though, as I said, we're not yet.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand the connection, the relationship of what we learned in this paragraph so far to what we learned in the past few days, the Aliyos, and I'm not seeing it. Maybe because he hasn't said enough, but maybe is the Indian of the neshama from our perspective. Okay, what's the connection between the Aliyos we learned before, which is very high levels?
I would wait till we finish the topic before answering that. We're literally in the middle of a paragraph, we're middle of discussing it. He said these two aliyahs in Avodah. So we're learning that. That's what we're middle of learning now, what these two aliyahs are. So let's finish the topic and then we'll...
Okay. In Balabatisha language, what he's coming to explain to us is that these two aliyahs that we just talked about in a more ethereal form, he's going to tell us what it means for us in our own work, how our neshama reaches up. I guess the lower elevation is the one he's talking about now from whatever it was.
I don't want to even speculate. I don't know. I'd wait till he finishes the subject. He's literally in the middle.
Okay. It's just hard
You're processing too much. I'm not processing. I'm just reading right now.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just trust him. I'll just hold on for the ride.
It's not for the ride. It's like the Rebbe is in the middle of speaking. I'd wait till he finishes what he wants to say. Then we can see whether it's clear or needs explanation.
I understand. Usually it's clear how one point leads to the next. This one's not as clear.
I don't find that to be the case necessarily, but okay.
All
right. Okay, Valkein Tichle v'Tichsev Nafshi Lichol Ba'atzmus Ein Sof HaKadosh Shemud Ma'elims. Now he adds another point here in the parentheses. Yovin, same thing. We come to understand the neshama beguf that's contemplating all this also comes to understand that the very nivroim, the very creations, which are yesh mamish, they're literally yesh, meaning that they have substance and their own identity, a self-contained identity. So another part of the contemplation, till now the contemplation was about the divine within existence that energizes existence, how that's only a reflection compared to the divine source that's beyond existence. And in the source, that order that's in existence is completely nullified. Now he's saying, what about the Nivraim themselves? So this contemplation also comes to teach us and understand that the Nivraim are truth. The Yesh Mamish, even though it feels like that they have their own identity, in truth is their whole reality is only being a reflection. Zivad, only a reflection of Hamispashetes Mibchinas Dvar Hashem Hamahava Esam, that extends from the word of God that creates them. So that's another detail in this contemplation. And therefore, also not just the energy in existence, but the very existence is bittul b'mekeidim, is nullified in its source. She'emdim tamid b'mekeidim u'b'teilim b'tachlis. So even though we don't feel it, but the truth is that they're bottled, they're nullified in the source because they are dependent on their source, like we learn in Shiur Yichud V'Amunah. Because they're always dependent, standing always b'mekeidim u'b'teilim b'tachlis, and utterly nullified. And not the way it appears be'enov in his eyes, the b'chinas be'enov in his eyes, the b'chinas yesh, where he sees himself as an independent entity. Because in truth, they're in a state of bittul, like he says in Tanya, the second section, which is Shiur Yichud V'Amunah. Valkain, and this too has an implication. His desire and his will is once he comes to this contemplation, really understands what is the truth of our reality. It's not our independent sense of ego and self, but it's really the divine. So therefore his desire and his will is to go out of his yeshus, of that state of self, of egocentric or self-absorbed consciousness, and the crassness or coarseness of that state. So this too leads to a level of Levels of Kallah, of wanting to become absorbed and go outside of our limited myopic perspective of self and become part of the larger and true reality. And this it says, Nichsafa, v'gam kolsa nafshi. My soul yearns. V'gam kolsa nafshi, and it also expires, it gets absorbed, it gets nullified. All the different words for kolsa, nafshi, like kalois hanefesh, leaving it's being absorbed in a reality that's greater than itself. Kolsa nafshi,
not nullified. Not nullified, but the other thing, it's like
kolsa nafshi, my soul expires. What?
Kate ois.
So how do you say it in English?
Maybe expired.
Kolsa nafshi lechatzis Hashem, my soul expires, my soul gets dissolved, absorbed, expires, is yearning toward lechatzis Hashem, to the courtyards of God. B'chinas hakiloyin v'hatshuka shebenefesh. The kiloyin, we sometimes use the word kiloyin as nullified, like when the kiloyin hapsila, when a wick gets obliterated or gets absorbed and dissolved as it's lighting a flame. V'hatshuka shebenefesh, and the yearning in the soul, lales, to elevate, ulicholel, and to be encompassed, ulicholel b'chinas atzmus ein sof. in the core of the infinite divine light. So all this is the first level of Kallah, the first elevation of the soul elevating from its state, neshama beguf, in a physical world, recognizing that it's only a reflection, and therefore wanting, and that reflection is infinitely distant from its source, and in its source it's completely nullified, and wanting to therefore become absorbed in that higher level. I think the word absorbed is a very good word in this context. That's Memaleh Kalam. However, now Gam b'chinas Sovev Kallah. Remember, we said that both is the two levels of Kallah. Also, the level of Sovev Kallah, however, Huraka Ora Levad, is also only a reflection. Even though it's a lot higher than Memaleh Kallah, because it's a divine transcendent energy. That's not an energy that relates to existence, it's beyond. But compared to who? Compared to the Eibishter himself, is also only a reflection. The Ima Yesha Zewa Ora Atzmis, even though it's a core reflection, not just a reflection of a reflection, it's a core experience because it's not a reflection that's diminished and commensurate to existence. It expresses a very pure divine level. Nevertheless, and that's why indeed it is a level of Kaddish Muvdal. We said before, Kaddish Shmai, Kaddish Shimcha, Kaddish Mecha, meaning also shame. Also the reflection is removed and Kaddish. Legabe Elam is compared to the worlds. Mekol Mokem, nevertheless, it's still only a reflection. And infinitely distant compared to Atzmus. In other words, even though the one piece of art is a complete reflection of the full, all the possibilities that the artist can create, but even if it's very being an artist, even though it's a fundamental level, but compared to the entirety of the person, I'm using the example of an artist, even as being artist is only a reflection. It's not reflecting on his entirety. So there's two levels of bittul. There's the bittul of Memaleh Kallah compared to its source. And then there's even the source, the Sovev Kallah is also only a reflection, even though it's a high level compared to Atzmus, which is beyond altogether. While Derech Mashakosa b'Teireh, in the parentheses, yes. And similar to what he says in Teireh, Dibra Maskal Posach Eliyahu. So Posach Eliyahu is the Maimer Vayera. In Teireh, there's a Maimer Posach Eliyahu, very fundamental Maimer. So what does he that more than the infinite distance, more than the distance between Asila and Atzia, and compared to Atzilus, so Asiya and Atzilus are quite distant. Atzilus is a world of Elokus. Asiya is a physical or spiritual world of structure as we know it, a yesh. So they're very distant. So he says, as distant as Asiya is from Atzilus, Atzilus is even more distant than Ein Sof. Than Ein Sof, I should say.
B'derech you're saying the Ramak is saying it, no?
No, there he talks about Keser, not Atzilus and Asiya. It says, Yeshem she'ein arech Keser l'gaba Atzilus, is ein arech Keser l'gaba Ein Sof. Here he says it l'gaba Asiyas and Atzilus. Some similar idea, but it's a little different. So he says, Kamoy Kain, how is it relevant to our discussion here? It says, Kamoy Kain Yeser Mishe'ein arech, more than the difference, B'chinas Memaleh Gam l'gaba Sovev Kallah, which is quite distant. One is immanent divine energy, and one is transcendent divine energy. Even more distant is Sovev Kallah l'gabe Atzmus Ein Sof. An example I gave with the artist, even though the artist can create infinite art, and that's definitely distant from one specific piece of art, but compared to what he is beyond being an artist, that's even more distant. That's how far it is. One of the ways that this is explained by Chassidim that I heard when I was a younger bocher was an explanation given in the context of, infinite set of numbers. So you say, for example, that infinity in mathematics, the infinite set of numbers, or infinity, is infinitely distant from the finite set of numbers. What that means is that 1, a billion, a trillion, a zillion, no matter how many numbers you go, is all equally distant from infinity, right? It's not like if 1 compared to a million is distant, but you know what? 100,000 compared to a million is not so distant. And 999,999 is right close to a million. They're all in the same world of finite. The only question is of amount. But the infinite set of numbers is a completely different reality. However, if you asked infinity, what do you see when you look at the finite set of numbers? So infinity will say it's all equal to me. But infinity will not say that they don't exist, because they have something in common. They're both numbers. This is finite, this is infinite. In other words, what infinity would say is that the finite numbers are lacking infinity, but you can't say that what they are is also completely nullified. Infinity can't say 1 doesn't exist or a million doesn't exist. It could say 1 exists, a million exists, and a trillion exists, but they're all equal compared to me. But since it's all numbers, numbers cannot say, even the infinite set of numbers can't say it's not the world of numbers. So their lack is what they're not, but they're not lacking in what they are. What they are, it has value, even though they're all equalized. However, let's say you ask a question to something that is beyond numbers altogether, where numbers don't even have no value altogether, not infinite set of numbers and not finite set of numbers. According to that level, it'll say it's not just lacking what it doesn't have, even what exists doesn't matter. Completely nullified, has no value, because the very word numbers doesn't have a value. So in that sense, that's like an example of Sovev Kallah, Memaleh Kallah would be, they both, yes, they're infinitely distant, but they're both in the world of divine energy. One is transcendent and one is immanent. But when you're talking about Atzmus Ein Sof, what he says here, Atzmus Ein Sof, so it's Yeser Ein Areich, that Sovev is from Memaleh, is Sovev compared to this level of Atzmus Ein Sof. So one of the explanations that we've learned over the years in understanding different levels of infinite distance, so to speak. U'kamesha Kosav, after the parentheses, Oisa Pella. What means Oisa Pella? So generally, Oisa Pella means he does wonders. He does wonders. Oisa Pella, he did a wonder. Shagam Bechinas Pella. So the Taich Chassidus is Oisa Pella. Why does he word the word Oisa? That even a wonder, who Bechinas Asiya Bilvad, Asiya Levad. Even a wonder is only a level of Asiya compared to the one who did the wonder. So you would think a Pella is unbelievable. Sovev Kallah. It's beyond the natural structure of existence. Like a miracle, a Pella. But even Pella is only Asiya Levad compared to that which is the one that's higher, that's doing it. It's only Asiya for him. It's only like an Asiya, like Kulam B'Chochma Asisa. That even Chochma is only like Asiya compared to the levels that are higher than Chochma. U'kamesha Kosav, La'isa Nefloyes Gdelis. Like it says, La'isa, again, Asa to the one who does great wonders. Shagam Masha Mufla, also the level that is Mufla, that's wondrous and beyond. U'kamei Amenu Mufla. Like we talk about a person who's a genius craftsman. So even though it's genius, even though it's extraordinary, but it's Asiya Levad, it's only like action. It's only like an external, superficial level compared to Atzmus. So this is Sovev Kallah, not just Memaleh Kallah, Sovev Kallah. Rakasoga Zu, to continue, next page, 1296. Only thing is that this comprehension, so even though it has something in common with Memaleh Kallah, but still this comprehension is already a neshama that's higher than being manifest in a body, the seichel hativi, and the seichel that even the natural mind can understand. Like we saw it before about Memaleh Kallah. V'hainu hasogas haseichel the nefesh alikis levad. So those Sovev Kallah is also only a reflection compared to Atzmus, but compared to Memaleh Kallah, it is a neshama higher than the body, and it's the nefesh alikis. The seichel, this is only the divine, the seichel, the mind of the nefesh alikis alone can comprehend this level of the transcendent. Because the natural mind, it cannot understand anything. Rak shemalubish betivi v'chumri. It could only understand things that are somewhat manifest and enclosed in the nature and in the corporeal or in the empirical. The understanding of a soul as it manifests in a body, that is through the natural mind. And that's the level that she understands and comprehends the divine. How does it understand mitoich? Through natural matters, through natural things. That are understood by the natural mind. Like I said before, you study nature, the design, the flesh of a human being, and that brings that also the natural mind also comes to understand this level of the divine. Like it says elsewhere, and as shall be explained. But the comprehension in that which is higher than that which manifests in the corporeal, in the mundane, in the physical, in the chumrius, in the crassness of existence, that does not exist at all in the realm on the comprehension of natural mind. Not just in the natural mind, but also in the soul, the reflection of the soul that manifests and is contained by it and relates to the guf, the body. The only place that you understand this higher level is rak ba'aseichel the nefesh alikis, only with the mind of the divine soul, which strips it, which is somewhat abstracts it from nature, where you're going outside of nature, the transcendent outside of nature. And now he's contrasting, and also with the neshamas that are not nitfas, that are not grasped by, that are not defined by the physical. In contrast to what he said in the earlier parentheses, these are the souls that Evdi Hashem, they serve God with their souls. On this higher level, when on the comprehension and the contemplation is in this core ha'ara of Sovev Kallah, and that this too is only a reflection compared to Atzmus. And infinitely distant altogether. So the neshama that's contemplating of the divine soul on this becomes completely nullified b'mitzias mamish, not just bittul hayesh. And this is a level of Kallah, which is Kaloyin, like you said, dissolved or absorbed or expired, or even, you can even say annihilated in a good way. It gets nullified, I would say. Ubitul b'mitzias, and its existence becomes nullified from its being as it's absorbed in this higher level. So here you have two levels of Kallah, the Kallah of Memaleh Kallah and the Kallah of Sovev Kallah. So that we finish this paragraph. I'll stop here.
The Ayin is longing. It's not nullified, means it's well bottled completely. Longing in a high veil of longing, expiring.
Consumed.
As over the years, as we learned Ayin Beis, I've used a lot of different words. They're all legitimate, because remember, at the end of the day, English is inadequate, so we use many words. Longing is a word. Chukka, kiloyin. We learned bittul. I mean, they all have similar concepts, and they're used in different ways. I think the key here is not the word, but the understanding of it. We all understand it's going outside of your own being. The level of how much can be many levels. There is a concept of klois hanefesh. where literally the person dies. His soul completely expires from him and leaves. Kol sanafshe, like kol dibra dibra parcha nishmasa. So here he's spoken about in a positive way.
Is a different thing.
Everything here is in a positive way. What means positive is because it's coming from appreciating what is real. So you want to become absorbed in it. You want to become dissolved in it. Consumed is another word, correct? There's many different words that could be used. Expiring is a word. Nullified is a correct word as well. Longing, he said shukah, kol sanafshe, there's many different words. They're all part of the experience of not being complacent and being satisfied and content with where you are, but being absorbed in something greater. So all the words are appropriate. It just comes down to choose one or two or a few of them. I'm fine with using 100 words if necessary to explain this idea, whatever it takes to understand it and experience it above all. So maybe this is the key. When we contemplate on these levels of divine, you tell me what happens to you. And then we find the word that expresses it. When a person is listening to music or reading a book and gets completely absorbed, we talked about this. In this case, completely loses his own sense of self and ego and so on. What do we call that? So it could be absorption, it could be consumed, it can be even obsessed, even, I think the absorbed is a very, very good word in my opinion, because it's very positive. Annihilate is a negative word. It's like obliterate, annihilate means negative, but it also has a positive side that you get completely nullified. When we say, when you say, like he said, when the light of a flame is completely nullified in the presence of a greater. He said before, headed fisasmokim, insignificant, many, many different words you can use. Okay.
Thank you. Interesting, he's using twice the word bittul here on the last line. It should be a verb, but I don't know if it is satfus or
maybe he's using it as a verb. Bittul as mevatel zich, not bitul, but bittul hamitzias.
I don't understand what he.
Or maybe he means the noun. It could be without the vav. Yeah, either way.
I don't understand how he's saying that the Sechel TV can't grasp these things. That how are we studying right now? He says
it's very simple. What we're studying now doesn't mean we understand it. It means we're talking about it. He didn't say you can't talk about it. Understanding something, like for example, the fact is that there are 8 billion people on this earth, and many will say that I have no doubt in my mind that there's a sun in the sky, but I have a doubt if God exists. What does that mean? Because we are not comfortable with the invisible. And as much as we can try to prove it, the fact of the matter is, even the most spiritual of us still relates to a physical entity much closer than we do to something that stimulates our senses and is empirically real than something that we abstract. So can we extrapolate and can we come to talk about, we could talk about it. When you talk about understanding something, I think that empirical stuff comes easier to us, we relate to it. And yes, we learn Chassidus about it. So we could just talk about it. It doesn't mean necessarily we understand it. Understanding requires a lot more than just talking about something. And understanding also the way of comprehending properly. So I think this requires a little more discussion. What means understanding something? Many people will say, I can't understand anything that's beyond my direct grasp. So this is a good discussion of what is the difference between Memaleh Kalam and Sovev Kalam. And in general, the fact of the matter is we do have a nefesh alakis, like he says. So it could also be that nefesh alakis is playing a role in us being able to relate to something that's completely beyond. Generally speaking, I would make the statement the following. The human mind left on its own can never come to fully understand, not believe, understand something that says that I don't exist. That's why a scientist can take you to the Big Bang and right before it. And when you ask him, what was before that? He says, I can't talk about it. Maybe nothing was there before it, and therefore we can't talk about it. Because existence itself can only talk about existence. It can't talk about non-existence. Again, not talk, understand. Of course we can talk. But existence, because of our very parameters of understanding things, of time and space. In volume 1, the Rebbe Rashab says a very strong statement. He says, a human being cannot understand truly what is above time. So when we say the question, God created the world 5,782 years ago. What was a second before it was created? And the answer is the second didn't exist because there was no before, because time is a creation. Wrap your head around that. Try to envision a reality that's completely beyond time. We can somewhat poetically imagine it and have some sense, but can we really say we understand it? Or take space. If you took a spaceship and hypothetically there was infinite amount of fuel, would the universe ever come to an end? Would you ever hit the wall? Or is it endless? Now you could say it's like a sphere. So even if you hit the edge, it'll just continue going but can you understand a thing that's completely beyond space? So we have examples for it that we could relate to it and we could discuss it. But when you start getting to true transcendent levels that he's discussing, that's beyond existence. So Yedias Hashlila is one way, through negating, through extrapolation. And I can elaborate. I just don't right now want to go into more detail. I'll talk about it more in the next classes, how we extrapolate. But direct Yedias HaChiyuv, to directly be able to interpolate and relate to it, it's like many things. We don't see, for example, the superconscious of a human being. There's no way we can empirically understand it quite the same way as we understand the conscious. Yes, we can extrapolate it's there, and we could even understand it to some extent, but that's still probably in the world of Memaleh. But just to show that there are levels. But as you go deeper down the rabbit hole, the more we need to abstract things. Anyway, there's a lot more to say on this topic, but that's let me suffice
Not
for now.
seichel, not neshama. Neshama could understand.
So the contention is that the seichel cannot understand something which it cannot experience. Essentially.
I don't know if the word experience, that is a correct statement to some extent, but I would go a step beyond that. You can understand things that you don't experience, but you have to have some handle to relate to it. What he calls here, like in Yonim Tivim, Amosagim B'Seichel HaTivi.
Well, to be continued. Pretty
On the page
philosophical.
before,
Maybe what you think is Asaga, the Rebbe Rashab would not call Asaga. Remember that.
on the page before, we mentioned Omoin Muflach Chule. This is the Lashon in Eitz Chaim and in Pardes Remoinim. It's not the Rebbe Rashab is just saying a word in the bottom, the last line. שגם משהו מופלח מוי, Omoin Muflach Chule, this in Eitz Chaim and in Pardes.
I don't know. You have a source? You're speculating, or you know?
I saw it in Google.
Oh, okay, could be. It's possible. Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop here.